Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Game Logic from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube. One of the co-hosts of the Enough to Keep Going weekly video games podcast on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube. Here with my inaugural episode of the Logic Files. It's episode number 1. Tonight we're going to be talking about Elder Scrolls, the Oblivion remaster, as well as the problems with MindsEye and Wuchang Fallen Feathers. A few topics going on in social media, including things like, what is the responsibility of corporations in the video game industry? Is it to drive profits, or is it to provide jobs for employees? We might get into that ongoing topic of what's going on over at PlayStation. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about Ghost Recon potentially shifting its engine. So without much further ado, let's get to it. We're fumbling around a little bit tonight because I've been trying to mess with my Stream Deck integrated with StreamYard. That's causing a few issues, but we will try and cover these topics as I have planned. I'm still working on figuring out how to get around StreamYard just a wee bit. All right, so this first news story over on Windows Central, Bethesda's Oblivion Remastered reaches massive milestone that makes it the Xbox Game Pass hit of the summer, but mixed Steam reviews highlight a big problem. Like I said, this news story over on Windows Central by Brendan Lowry. There have been quite a few great games made available on Microsoft's widely used subscription service, Xbox Game Pass this summer, ranging from Xbox's own Doom, The Dark Ages, to critically acclaimed surprises like Claire Obscure Expedition 33 and The Altars. Perhaps the most popular of them all, though, is the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion Remastered. I say that because on Friday morning it was announced that Bethesda and Virtuos Games' modernized Unreal Engine 5 version of the 2006 RPG classic has hit over 9 million players across all of its platforms. This includes the Xbox Series X and S, Windows PC on both Xbox PC and Steam, and PlayStation 5. So like I said, 9 million players, and that is in just over 3 months since its surprise launch on Xbox, PC, and PlayStation. Bethesda shared the milestone in a lighthearted social media post, and that number reflects total players, so that's not sales, because a lot of those people are obviously consuming that game on Xbox Game Pass Ultimate. Despite that, there's still news and supposition that the game has sold very well on those other platforms, outperforming the original Oblivion and becoming April's best-selling game in the U.S. with continued strong performance into June. So I can't remember exactly, but I think if you go back to it charting, I think it did chart on NPD that month that it was out. Bethesda has released several updates addressing bugs and performance issues, including one that fixed the Dark Brotherhood quest error. Still, the game's developer Virtuos recently laid off 270 employees due to internal restructuring. That's what I wanted to dig into a little bit tonight, because every time we go into these topics, I like to dig in some of the extra details out on the periphery just a bit. And so, of all the numerous aspects that you could where you could pull a thread on this story, I wanted to talk a little bit about Virtuos because I'm not entirely very familiar with the company. So prior to its layoffs, Virtuos employed approximately 4,200 people globally across Asia, Europe, and North America. In mid-July of 2025, they cut 270 roles, so about 7% of their workforce, with 200 layoffs in Asia and 70 in Europe. Fewer than 10 roles affected in France, and those 10 roles affected in France were where the Oblivion Remastered core team is based. So even though the kind of initial rounds that this story made about the layoffs being that they did not impact the Oblivion Remastered team, they in fact did, although granted at a very, very small scale. Hey, Glacian, thanks so much for swinging through. I appreciate you just going over some news stories and topics in the news in kind of a fireside chat format and fumbling around as I learn my way around StreamYard. But thanks very much for swinging through. I appreciate you. And if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Virtuos basically has a reputation as a go-to co-developer and porting specialist. So they're really a little bit like a support studio, but they do also do their own individual projects. And like I said, those are primarily mastered around porting games and sometimes being on Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion Remaster this year, which was co-development for platforms PC, PS5, and Xbox Series. Previously, they worked on the Dark Souls remastered port to the Nintendo Switch in 2018. They've also worked on the Outer Worlds Spacer's Choice Edition, which went to the Nintendo Switch and was released in 2023. That release, so my general take on Virtuos is they do a good job of getting the games onto whatever platform, but they don't, I think, have the type of reputation like a Nix's, which, and granted, all of the PlayStation games that we see go into PC often arrive in a pretty shambly state, and then it's kind of damage control parties away for the first 30 days, and then they do quickly turn that around. But Nix's and Bluepoint have kind of a mixed reputation on how well the games are that they deliver. Nix's having the better reputation, I think. And Virtuos is probably what I'd think of as a skosh behind. And so this version of Outer Worlds Spacer's Edition that wound up on the Nintendo Switch in 2023 was noted for having mixed performance at launch, and then did have optimization patches that followed it up. Their other work includes support on Horizon Zero Dawn and Forbidden West, Cyberpunk 2077 updates, Mortal Kombat 1, and several other high-profile remasters. The studio was founded in 2004 in Shanghai. They're now headquartered in Singapore and have a network of global studios. Several venture capital companies and investors have made contributions buying into the company. In 2021, they received $150 million infusion from Baring Private Equity in Asia, making BPEA the largest stakeholder. That management retains over 70% ownership alongside early investor 3D Capital Partners. Their total funding that they've received externally outside of like straight publisher deals is estimated to be about $165 million, including legacy backing from Legend Capital and Zugi Venture Capital. Now, I believe all those were like incremental infusions along the way. I don't believe that's the total amount of funding that they've received over the years, but that's just kind of gives you a flavor for the size of the studio and how much backing they've gotten. Like I said, pre the 2020, what year did we say those the big layoffs were in? 2000. So that was the most recent layoff, 2025. Like I said, they were at about 4,200 heads. They have about 200 people in Asia and 70 in Europe. Despite the success of Oblivion Remastered, one of Bethesda's top releases in 2025, and with strong sales performance, Virtuos reportedly did not benefit from proportional royalties as they operated under a royalty-free contract. That's some of the news that has come out and was reported by Windows Central, Games Radar, Game Developer, and Global Venturing, that the deal that they made with Microsoft did not include payment of royalties based on sales of the game, is what I assume, as well as no royalties benefiting from number of hours played on that title in Game Pass. The layoffs are described by Virtuos as part of a strategic rebalancing of roles across studios and geographies, focusing resources in high-demand regions and cutting underutilized service segments. So one would presume that, given the state that the industry is in now and the way that Microsoft is scaling back on projects, as well as probably other publishers who are partnering with Virtuos are scaling back on projects, it's not unreasonable to realize or assume that that they would have projects that would be getting cut. The Oblivion remastering team, like I said, was largely spared from job losses, indicating its continued priority within Virtuos's portfolio, but that team did not go unscathed, again losing 10 roles post delivery of the Oblivion remaster. Right, so I thought that was pretty interesting, just again some of those details. I think, as big publishers look more and more to outsource work, which we know is a particular strategic vector of Xbox, that more and more of that work is being outsourced. While it seems like not to be a bad idea to go with 1099s or contractors to do a lot of that work, for some of the work, it seems that it would make sense to more so partner and just outsource whole piece scopes of work rather than hiring individual contractors as staff augmentation. There's a cost that's associated with that. And typically when you co-develop with a partner, there was a story a couple months ago that maybe on the Gaming Business Show or one other podcast that I listened to that talked a lot about the rise of co-development in the video game industry. That at least there's less of a brain drain of drop-off when you have a loss of continuity of employees, right? When you hire a bunch of 1099s and individual contractors, you have people come on, they can't stay but for so long because of some prior court cases. And I know Microsoft is one of the companies that stands by those statutes in order to minimize their exposure to liability. But typically those contractors can only come on for a certain period of time, so they go through learning curve and then they're let go. And then you go to bring the next 1099 on, and that person obviously has more learning curve. So you just constantly have this cyclical loss of domain expertise in whichever technology stack you're working on. That is also part of the reason that it's been speculated that Xbox is kind of following this development strategy of shifting more and more over to Unreal Engine. This is similar to things that I've done in my own work life, where I've tried to focus on technologies where I know there is a good body of easily recruitable talent, right? Rather than focusing on components of the technology stack that are either fading or becoming antiquated, where new college students aren't learning those technologies, or where they're just very limited and very difficult to find on the job market, because then those people command higher salaries, right? So it would seem to make sense to focus on potentially shifting and transitioning a lot of your development foundation to Unreal Engine, because you're going to find a larger pool of employees who are experienced in that technology stack, and then therefore can probably negotiate better salaries, particularly when you're talking about, again, outsourced contractor support, as well as co-development. So before we move on to the next news story, is kind of talking about the problems with MindsEye and Wukong. I'm going to take a quick break here and get some coffee. Not going away, just taking a sip. But let's get this news story off the screen, and we'll be shifting over here in a second to the next news story. Sorry, I didn't mean you guys to hear the clatter of the coffee cup lid, but I had put myself on mute. So this next news story over at PC Games N by Jamie Horay. MindsEye delays its exciting Hitman crossover until the time is right. MindsEye developer Build Rocket Boy unveils 2 new updates for the game, but its Hitman-themed mission will no longer drop this month. Build Rocket Boy has announced 2 new updates for its underwhelming and struggling action-adventure game MindsEye, both of which are laden with bug fixes, performance improvements, and quality-of-life features. While this work is absolutely required to get the game into an acceptable condition, it comes at the expense of one of its most exciting pieces of post-launch content, promised for July. MindsEye crossover with Hitman has now been postponed, with Barb simply saying that the content will arrive when the time is right. So obviously this is the studio led by Leslie, I believe his name is, actually I don't recall his last name off the top of my head. I'm brain dumping now while I'm live, but former employee over at Rockstar. So like I said, these 2 new updates are out, bug fixes, performance enhancements, quality of life improvements, causing a delay of the game's crossover mission with Hitman. This again is a game published obviously by IO Interactive, the primary purveyors of the Hitman series. Crossover originally slated for July has now been postponed indefinitely. The collaboration was meant to feature Agent 47 in a special mission with MindsEye's Red Rock City as part of the game's early free content roadmap. IO Interactive, creators of Hitman, had selected MindsEye as its first third-party project to publish, a decision that may now be in question. It's really unfortunate because we were actually on another podcast earlier today talking about the differences between 2007 and 2017. And one of the things I noted for the year in gaming that was 2017 is that was the year that Square Enix officially decoupled itself from IO Interactive and they gained their independence. And At the time, a lot of us were worried about the survivability and viability of IO Interactive and how well they would do as a standalone studio. I would say maybe mega studio. The fact of the matter is that the Hitman franchise has really flourished since then. It's really become a platform in an ecosystem in and of itself. And so it's really kind of exciting what they've done and how they've elevated Hitman from kind of these little tiny kind of singular standalone titles that were kind of, level puzzles of their own to a larger franchise and a larger world that people really engage in and participate in, live in. And now they may have bitten off more than they can chew by putting their trust in MindsEye, which from the times that it's been shown on the Keighley stage, it's actually looked to be fairly promising. It's had some rough edges, but the premise of it all looked really good. And what I've seen of it looks good, again, in its premise. I haven't played it since it dropped because it has a mostly negative rating on Steam. And so it's unfortunate that it's so marred by performance problems as it is. So hopefully they'll be able to turn this thing around. I know that Build a Rocket Boy has issued a lot of statements saying that they're committed to the game and it's their intention to keep supporting it and to get it into good shape. That remains to be seen. We'll see. We'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about Wuchang. Again, lots of promises, lots of indications of commitment, and I feel like that's important. One of the things that I constantly talk about in my own assessment of the industry is that I put a lot of stock in how development teams respond to adversity, right? Initial delivery is important, but that first 30 days that I talked about, when I talked about PlayStation, look, to me personally, in my view of PlayStation putting its games on PC, I ding them a lot for the way that they arrive when they don't arrive in a good state, but I also do give them credit for quickly jumping on it and turning it around in 30 days. Not every game does that. You look at Respawn Studios, which I also would put a lot of stock in. They're a part of EA, an incredibly large publisher. They have a lot of talent. They have a lot of experience, obviously headed up, by Zampella. That's one of the studios under his umbrella since he's taken over the Battlefield franchise. But like the state of Jedi Survivor and the continuing O&M support of it and getting it in supposedly into a better state never really happened. And that was short of the performance and the operational excellence that I really expected from that team. And it was really kind of inexcusable, again, given that team's pedigree and its backing. So, again, shades of similar situations going on here with MindsEye and Wuchang, which we'll talk about next. And my hope is that they will turn around. MindsEye, in and of itself, again, the premise seems fairly enticing and interesting, and I hope that they do keep at it and they are able to turn it around. Build a Rocket Boy issued a statement apologizing for the delay and promising more information when the time is right. While other missions are still expected for both standard and premium pass holders, Build a Rocket Boy has not clarified if those two are delayed. So there's a knock-on and a domino effect here potentially of the entire roadmap of content, and it remains to be seen if they're going to be able to kind of get that back on track. Studio notes that updates will slow down, with only 2 major patches confirmed, one in August, which adds cutscene skipping, and another in September. I've seen lots of criticism from the player base who went ahead and bought in on the game, despite the fact that I think a lot of these things were known, that they wish that they'd had cutscene skipping there from the beginning. And they're not the only game that is guilty of that. Trying to remember. I want to say there's some game that I've been playing recently. Maybe Donkey Kong Bonanza. Maybe another game that had an unskippable cutscene, or at least the way to skip the cutscene was just not readily apparent and intuitive. Like the button you needed to hit was like off in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, where if you're playing on a very large screen display, your eyes just start drawn to. But despite initial promises of robust post-launch support, Barb's struggle suggests that delivering on all their content plans may prove difficult. So this is just a story that we're going to have to keep our eye on, and like I said, hope that things turn around. Let's go ahead and skip over and start talking about Wuchang. So this news story over on Polygon by Austin Manchester. Wuchang Fallen Feathers is a hit, but also being slammed on Steam. Action role-playing game Wuchang Fallen Feathers is charting some rough waters in the days after launch, despite its gameplay being top-notch Souls-like action. Wuchang has debuted to nearly 16,000 mostly negative reviews on Steam at the time of this writing. It's only been able to amass so many reviews because so many pirate warriors are playing it. Wuchang's 24-hour peak player count sits at over 131,000 players on Steam. The crux of those negative reviews concerns the game's poor PC performance. In short, it's an unoptimized mess. I played on PlayStation 5, and after adjusting some graphical settings, didn't encounter any performance issues. Players also reported not receiving pre-order bonuses and some pricing anomalies in some regions, according to a statement put out by MindsEye Games and 505 Games, Wuchang's respective developer and publisher. These problems should never have occurred, and we deeply regret the inconvenience and negative experience some players are currently facing. Now, one of the additional points of criticism that I kind of pile on with Wuchang is they did issue a patch day 2 of the game's release. And again, while that's commendable, that is also signifying of a particular problem, because there's no way that you didn't know that the game was broken and busted and then amazingly turned around a multi-gigabyte patch the following day. You had to have known the game was broken when you published it, and you had to have been working on the patch beforehand, before all the complaints started. So it's just unfortunate the way that's going down. Let's see. In response, patch 1.3 was released to address major problems, including performance optimizations, bug fixes, and content reward corrections. Key fixes include resolving startup crashes, stuttering during finishers, and improving VRAM usage for low-end GPUs. And again, this is one of these points of convergence where, the studio is going to be held accountable, but by the same token, there shouldn't necessarily be 8 gigabyte GPUs running around either that are being sold by both NVIDIA and AMD. Gameplay changes include reducing and rebalancing landmines in Chapter 2 to improve fairness as a goodwill gesture. All Steam players will receive the game's soundtrack DLC for free. That, in my mind, is not nearly a point of compensation for what consumers are going through. And so both of these, if I'm not mistaken, both of these games are on Unreal Engine 5, so kind of that drama continues. It's really unfortunate that, again, both of these games looked, in my opinion, really good at their showings at the TGAs at the TGAs and Summer Game Fest. I can't remember exactly which one was shown where and when. But Wuchang, I would say, was probably the better looking of those two. Obviously, a lot of hype and fervor surrounding this release based on it being a Souls-like, but also arriving here in the month of July, where DK Bonanza comes out. But there's really an opportunity to really kind of stick the landing and not be overcrowded by other games coming out this month. I think the only other major release that I can think of, we've gotten the Division 2 DLC. I think we've gotten a Diablo 4 DLC or season boot. But there hasn't been too much surrounding or crowding out the landscape other than Eric's Home, which was an indie title that I think had a little less splash and panache to it than this game did. So again, unfortunate that they've kind of missed this window of opportunity. Again, hope that they continue plugging away at it and the game eventually turns itself around. Okay, so the next topic I want to get into involves some of the discourse going on social media. In one case, it really kicked off by two big influencers. This isn't a hit piece segment on those two big influencers. They are their own unique individuals. But it did bring up an interesting topic that I want to go over, which is, what is the responsibility of gaming corporations? We know that the responsibility of C-suite officers is to return maximum value to shareholders. Obviously, it's a recurring theme that's going on, that those concerns of shareholders are trampling on the lives of the workers. But I think there's a higher level, not more important, but there's another discussion topic 1,000 feet up in altitude that is oriented around what is the responsibility of a corporation and how much weight and responsibility does it bear in terms of providing a employment outlet for for citizens, right? For people, and I want to talk about that here in a second. So this discussion topic kind of came across my radar because of the initial dust kicked up on this topic by Hogue and Jez. I think people who keep up with the gaming news are familiar with those two personalities. The thread starts off with Hogue really with Jez's original post that Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella says the firm's 15,000 plus layoffs are weighing heavily on him, which arrived despite acknowledgement that Microsoft is thriving by every objective measure. Hogue's retweet is, Jez is far from the only culprit here, but I hate how the juxtaposition of company-wide success to layoffs presupposes that the primary purpose of an entity is to provide jobs. So, let's hold on there a second. So, the reason this initially caught my eye is because I've seen this recurring theme with influencers, accounts in social media, that there, in my opinion, is this effort to kind of give Xbox and Microsoft a pass for the layoffs. Everybody's doing it. AI is trying to replace tech workers en masse across the entire technology industry and the video game industry as a subset. They're so big, so obviously the total number of layoffs would be bigger. What about PlayStation's layoffs, et cetera, et cetera. This is my feeling and stance on that topic. Each of these companies has endured some degree of adversity and is trying to navigate a difficult environment. Yes, in general, large numbers of tech companies are making large numbers of layoffs. There are some exceptions. Apple is not laying off as many people nearly in scale, despite its size, as a lot of the other tech companies, and one of those reasons is because they specifically had a very conscious and deliberate strategy to not overhire during the pandemic. But in all of their cases, none of these things that they've encountered, none of the problems they have are things that have been done to them. No one came in and held anybody at gunpoint in the C-suite and said, thou shalt make these choices. And all of the choices that they are making are all different. Google did a thing. Cisco did a thing. Oracle did a thing. HP did a thing. All of them did different things. For Microsoft, and I get it, it's an unfortunate circumstance, it's a perfect storm. But what they did is they overhired during the pandemic. They are also in the midst of making a big pivot to ramping up their investment into AI. They're also going down that path in terms of internally where they're trying to convert their projects to the purposes of AI, which means they need different skill sets than the people that they had there before. They also made huge acquisitions in 2023, obviously, with Activision, and the year prior with Bethesda, and really in the years intervening from 2018 through 2022 and 2023. And in the same, and also they've brought new people into the C-suite. So in my mind, and again, now we're getting into speculation. I would say there's some objective evidence of this, but it's also partially my speculation. We have a changing dynamic in the C-suite, in my mind, from the power that Amy Hood is exerting, but also they brought in Carolyn Dybeck-Hape, hoping I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but she was the former CFO at General Electric, who is generally credited with turning that company around and really saving them from, I won't necessarily say bankruptcy, but very hard times. Kind of, I would characterize it in similar fashion to what Intel is going through now. And she was really the person credited with turning that around. They brought her on as COO. You now have two people sitting at the board, at both the conference room table in terms of Microsoft corporate, but then also in the boardroom as members of the board, right? Exerting this influence of two people, two C-level officers who come out of the financial space and are very hyper concerned about the company's profitability. And Dybeck-Hape specifically brought in, charged with a mandate of helping navigate the waters of a shift in strategy. Again, none of these were things that anybody came into the C-suite, held Satya at gunpoint, and told him make these choices. These are all choices that Xbox made. On the PlayStation side, they have had a highly volatile strategy in pursuing beefing up the number of gas games in their portfolio that they actually own, that are not, third party, that don't give them, their 30% cut of revenue, but actually that they own. I suspect, and justifiably so, in order to bolster themselves and make them more resilient and give them greater ride-through capability. Right now, their ride-through capability for tough times is solely the size of their install base. And it absolutely makes sense, and there's objective evidence that they should have gone down the path of gas. But I don't know that they had to make billions of dollars of investment right from the corporation, again, from Sony parent corporation, into gas to go along with their first-party endeavors, which theoretically shouldn't have been impacted because it was all extra investment. We'll talk about that here in a bit. But they went with the shotgun approach of spraying a lot of bullets in a very wide pattern to go after gas. And that's absolutely questionable, given that the vast majority of them have just outright failed, been canceled, been pulled off the market, in the case of Concord. Then you have again, extremely volatile positioning of Bungie within the company. You kind of bring them in, not only so that you own Destiny 2, and it's kind of an acqui-hire, in my opinion, right? You're acquiring the skill set of a gas game domain expert. And again, people have different varying opinions of Bungie, but you bring them in and you also, bring them to the governance table to review the gas games at milestone greenlight meetings to determine whether or not to have a vote and whether or not those games are proceeding forward. And in the meantime, the apparent trust that PlayStation has in Bungie has oscillated, right, to where they came in originally seeming very well trusted, and then that trust seems to not be there, or seems to be radically on the decline now. You have the acquisition of the company of Haven Studios, headed by Jade Raymond. And again, I would give full credit to Jade's capabilities, but as I constantly point back, the fact of the matter is that she hasn't really shipped anything since 2014. And I think the 2014 credit was like her as an executive producer. So she hasn't really had her hands really deeply in the mix of coaching, mentoring, and managing a team to the production of software that has actually shipped as a video game. You have her at EA Motive, you then have her at Google, and at both of those positions, no project that she worked on actually culminated and actually shipped. So why you would put the great faith in her and the studio that she put together to deliver on a gas game when she doesn't have a gas games in her background, right, as a core competency, right, is another reason for that volatility. And then finally, you have Naughty Dog, Bend, and Bluepoint, which, the only one of those I would include as your, what I call the S-tier marquee studios is Naughty Dog, but still the other two are definitely, core components. Bluepoint being a big acquisition that you made, that you went after for their porting expertise, and Bend Studios having a long legacy as an internal PlayStation studio, first-party studio, both from its legacy in Siphon Filter and other titles, but then also being a support studio for some of your major, again, marquee S-tier first-party content that has gone out. And all three of those studios wound up having a lot of their production time consumed by going after a gas game. Some of which are titles that weren't necessarily really in their bailiwick. In the case of Bend and Bluepoint, they were IPs that were not core to those internal studios. And so what is the opportunity cost of that? The opportunity cost is that Bluepoint was not working on porting a major first-party game, or, working on something like, had you made some deal for IP with From Software, right, cranking out some type of remaster possibly. With Bend, you don't greenlight Days Gone 2, and I don't really question that decision, but you also don't spool them off to work on an original idea of their own. And so that's the opportunity cost. Whether you agree or disagree with that or not, the fact of the matter is that quantitatively they could have been working on something else and they didn't. So they wound up losing time, and you wind up, and being that both of their projects were canceled, you now have two games in your portfolio that don't come out. And PlayStation, has also done layoffs. And I think you have to acknowledge that some attribution of that has to be towards pointing a lot of dollars and effort and strategy at gas games that didn't hit and didn't culminate. You have the closure of the studio that worked on Concord, and you have those people having lost their jobs. So both of these companies have made mistakes. And again, no one walked into PlayStation Studios, into SIE, and held anybody at gunpoint and told them, thou shalt do this. So the accountability for the tactical and strategic choices that both of them made are absolutely their responsibility. They're no one else's. They're not an industry-wide problem. And putting out tweets that suggest that, there's nothing else that they could have done, or that's just the way it is, that's not acceptable in my mind, particularly from influencers who claim that their responsibility is to advocate for consumers. Theoretically, what should go hand in hand with that is also advocating for the workers of the video game industry who make the games that we love. I readily recognize that layoffs are unfortunately a reality in corporate America, in a capital economic system, and sometimes they have to happen. Having them happen en masse and at scale due to some of these choices that have been made, which are not the norm, they're abnormal. So if you close a studio because suddenly, as Matt Piscatella has reported, 30% of people aren't buying games and they're spending 40% of their time in gas games, and you don't have gas games in your portfolio, that makes a little bit of sense. But when you do that, combined with the fact that you hired a crap ton of people to make 12 gas games, like you share in that responsibility. Again, that's not something that was done to you. And ditto for Microsoft. Nobody told them to go chase AI. That was a choice that they made, and they knew what the consequences of that were going to be, which is that they were going to lay people off. Where people have been caught in the crossfire, you have employees who were part of the ATVI acquisition who had been given a return to work order, an RTO by Blizzard, and were told, hey, if you don't start coming back to the office, you're going to lose your job. Like you can't be a remote employee anymore. The pandemic is over. And so you literally had people with their belongings packed up in cars transiting out to California to be at the Blizzard office, who were then caught in the acquisition-driven layoffs and told you no longer have a job. So those types of problems and issues are acute. They're not, they're not a nothing burger, and they're not normal. They're not just, part of the kind of the everyday, layoff hire cycle. Again, they're driven by the choices that companies made, and they shouldn't be given a pass for those. Back again to this larger topic of corporations. One of my perspectives is that, look, we do a lot of things in this country in particular to protect corporations, to give them tax, credits, to try and ease the burden of regulation on them. Although, regulation has its place, obviously, but there's tons of lobbying organizations that millions of dollars get pumped into simply for those people to go to Capitol Hill and argue on their behalf. As a participant in that system, I have to believe that one of the reasons we do that is in the hope that that will help in the generation of jobs, not directly, but it should, we hope, would be a knock-on effect, and that they will employ people, and that those people will be paid a salary, and that those people will take that salary and go out on the economy and buy stuff, and thereby, by so doing, be an input to our growing economic health and our own GDP. So to say that the corporate entity has no responsibility for providing jobs, no, they absolutely do. Like, that is part of the reason why they have a protective layer wrapped around them. And so to, again, do all of these hires that all of these companies have done, and then to turn around and lay them off while they reap big profits, reap big revenue, that's a problem. And I'm not necessarily saying that CEOs should be taken out into the courtyard and behind the woodshed and given a beating, but there does need to be some modicum of commensurate, I don't know, there needs to be some equilibrium right in the system, rather than kind of some of the things that we see going on here, in my opinion. Okay, let's move on to what I think is the last news story and kind of get out of the social media realm and back onto news. And then we might discuss this situation at PlayStation with the job posting here as part of the wrap up. I appear to have lost the Ghost Recon story, so I will try and bring that back up. Sorry about that. Okay, this news story over at Game Rant by Dominique Bosniak. There's a rumor that the new Ghost Recon game may be switching game engines. The new Ghost Recon game will reportedly use Unreal Engine. The reported move would mark a major technological shift for Ghost Recon, ending its years-long tradition of leveraging Ubisoft's own tech. Since its inception in the early 2000s, the Ghost Recon franchise has mostly relied on in-house engines, except during the 6th console generation, when select builds of Ghost Recon 2 and GRAW, Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter, utilize modified versions of Unreal Engine 2. The PC ports of these titles still leverage Ubisoft's own engines, as did the games that followed. In the first half of the 2010s, Ghost Recon Future Soldier and Ghost Recon Phantoms relied on the in-house LED engine, whereas the 2017 Ghost Recon Wildlands used Anvil Next 2.0, originally developed for Assassin's Creed. The latest entry in the series, Ghost Recon Breakpoint, released in 2019, was also made on Anvil Next 2.0. Now, had a recent conversation in the GCP Discord. Fellow content creator Slowmo Backslap also is hand in hand with me on the topic of Snowdrop, another internal engine at Ubisoft and one used primarily by Massive Entertainment for the Division series. And lots of us think that Snowdrop engine is one of the best engines around. Its implementation in the Division 2, when you particularly look at like all the clutter and debris that's strewn about DC, a lot of the internal environments that you go into, and the fact that it's able to draw all of those highly intricate, highly granular, highly textured debris elements on the ground and still run at incredible frame rates. I was playing it earlier this week on a box with an RTX 3080 Ti, granted only on 1080p monitors, but they're 1080p high refresh rate monitors, so they're 240 hertz monitors, and the game generally runs at in gameplay in excess of 210 frames per second. It's really, really amazing. So my hope for Ghost Recon would be that it would be on the Snowdrop engine. So it's kind of unfortunate that it's going to Unreal Engine. Again, I go back to what I mentioned about what Xbox is doing, and again, it kind of perfectly makes sense from a software development, software engineering perspective to target an engine in your technology stack where you're going to be able to amply hire people on the job market, and where the notion of O&M is something that is manageable. In fact, it really puts you in a position to even develop the game and then actually hand off kind of O&M to a support studio, or to outsource that to a co-developing company so that the rest of your internal core team, first-party team, can go on to work on your next big project. So it makes sense from that perspective. As a gamer and as a consumer, I like games that run on Snowdrop engine, and so it's unfortunate, I think, that you're going for Unreal. I think the other thing that happens, and this is a sentiment that Kay Asante from the Gaming Circle podcast brought up that I wholeheartedly agree with, which is that, and you go back to the showcases of this summer, and one of the comments that was made by myself and concurred with several others is that from the various showcases, so many of the games look very samey. So when you look at the PlayStation at the PlayStation Showcase and Summer Games Fest itself, there's a lot of sameness, and I think that comes because so many people are developing things on Unreal Engine, and so therefore there are so many assets in the marketplace that are common that people are going to get to base their models on. And so I think, and I think this is mostly Kay Asante's sentiment, is like the more like 70% of the gaming industry, continues down this path of like everybody developing on Unreal Engine, the greater is the likelihood that you're going to start seeing games more and more and more and more that kind of look the same. And so it's kind of unfortunate that Ubisoft, like there's not very many in-house engines that really carry water, right, for a given publisher or a given platform owner. The Decima engine, I think, is a great engine. Frostbite, despite the fact that it's been much maligned in the past, and it was very rocky how EA was kind of managing that. I still don't think that they're managing it well, because it's still the team at DICE that's still primarily responsible for it. And I've always said, look, if you're going to have a team provide an engine that you expect the entire company to use, you really need to break that team away from a core studio where they're also supporting development of an actual game. Because what's going to happen is any manager that comes by is going to be under pressure to make sure that team's priority is on supporting the game that studio is accountable for putting out, and not putting as much time and effort and focus on a tier 2 or a tier 3 support ticket from a studio that's geographically dislocated in some other country or some other state, asking for support help for your engine, right? It's not like Epic, where Epic is a part of their business is Unreal Engine, and so those tickets have to be answered, or else they're going to lose customers who are buying their engine. So even though it got off to that rocky start, in recent years, you've had teams finally get the time to develop assets and tools and utilities that support development of Frostbite. And so now you have like the Madden team, and I can't remember, I think it was one of the, and you have the Madden team and the FIFA team utilizing modifications of Frostbite that have the tools and the utilities and assets and models in them that can make that engine effective for developing genres beyond first-person shooters. And so I personally think Frostbite has seen a ton of turnaround, and it's finally hitting the point where it's kind of hitting its stride within the EA internal studio. So you have Frostbite, you have Snowdrop, you have Anvil, and you have Decima. Unfortunately, at Xbox, we see kind of a retirement and a shifting away from the Slipspace engine. So you don't have very many engines out there that really have the ability to give games the unique look from kind of a native development state, in terms of like a creative not driving a visual style that specifically and deliberately steps aside from the mainstream or the norm of everybody else who's using the same engine. So it's kind of unfortunate. I think that Ghost Recon is heading down this path. Obviously, also, it's been a storied history in these past 2 or 3 years since UE5 games have started to be delivered, of the typical state that they arrive in from a performance perspective. And so, again, that is also cause for concern. The Ghost Recon games have already had a problem with uptake in their initial delivery over the last 2 or 3 iterations. They are, as is typically the case with almost all Ubisoft games, that they come out to middling reviews and middling critical uptake, and then you look back in on them like in 2 years, 3 years on Steam, and you will find that they have mostly positive, overwhelmingly positive reviews, that they've grown a very loyal and staunch community that really loves and supports the game, that Ubisoft has continued delivering on content, engendering that loyalty. And so, although these games have released to kind of lukewarm reception initially, I think they've gone on to have exactly those types of user install bases. And so, again, it's unfortunate that it looks like we're probably heading down a path where the next delivery of a Ghost Recon game, may be beleaguered by these performance issues as well, particularly as we talked about with Wuchang, if there continue to be 8 gigabyte cards, VRAM cards running around in the PC space as part of the norm and getting a lot of uptake. Now, I will say in this generation, it appears that both AMD and NVIDIA are putting out 16 gigabyte cards of their low-end SKU, and those cards are actually selling better than the 8 gigabyte cards. So I'm hoping that we are approaching an inflection point where the market will kind of evolve and start voting with its dollars and taking care of 8 gigabyte cards. And then we'll also see like the 3070 Ti's aging out, and that will become less of a problem as well. So one can only hope. Okay, this last topic I'm going to cover. It's a little bit off the cuff because I didn't really have it planned for the agenda, but I am going to get into it just to talk about it briefly. So obviously the news of the town in the last 24 hours has been the job rec that was posted over on the SIE career boards, hiring a senior director of multi-platform management, I think the job is called. And so this is a tweet that I posted. People continue to kind of lose their minds on this topic, but what I had to say on the topic, which I will admit the opening part of this is at least a lie because I'm commenting on it now. But I've seen the PlayStation job posting and I won't be commenting on it beyond this. Plenty of people have done so already. Plenty of people have written assessments of what I believe it means. Plenty of others have written things I don't think it means. Twitter is a place where rabid fandoms gather with little to no objectivity in their back and forth. It doesn't matter whether you write 2 sentences or 52. Those fandoms will believe what they want and refute anything that doesn't align to the perspective that says that their brand is winning and count you among the enemy tribe of their brand regardless of where you actually play games. My focus continues to be on what is, decomposing what was that got us to what is, commenting on the things that have official announcements of what we're getting soon, and playing games. Enjoy your console war. I really didn't want to do this, but I'm going to click into this because I think there's a ton of stuff in here I have not read. I'm just going to dork with my notifications, but a mutual of mine, Donnell Brown, mentioned my issue is if you're putting games on other platforms, why release another console? If you're putting your big games on other platforms, you ain't playing the console. But you know what? It ain't my business. They're going to do what they want. So this is my response. And Donnell has a very credible opinion. He's somebody who often responds to my threads and that I interact with. He's not someone prone to panic, right? So there are lots of people in the PlayStation community that are panicking, as they did when games first started being sent to PC, as they did when this gas initiative started. I don't include him on the bucket that I would say are people who are losing their minds and flipping out over something that I think is small. I think there are people who are concerned about what this means, and there's other comments in this thread that I definitely concur with, where the key notion is that we're back in a state on PlayStation where the messaging is being a little muddled. That has been my accusation and my assessment of Xbox for the past at least like very, very super acute for the last 3 years, maybe arguably back as far as 2020. And then, there's kind of been mixed messaging kind of all along the way since Phil Spencer took over. But it got particularly acute in 2022. And that was really the point where I kind of clapped out with Xbox. And the position they occupy in my head kind of became way less than just a company who screws up every now and then, right? My opinion of their leadership and kind of what they've done, and in particular, not their strategies or anything, has become one that, from a PR and messaging perspective, is very, very low on my performance bar, and something I'm very critical of. PlayStation is not nearly to that extreme in the spectrum, but I will say they are definitely kind of in the, when I mentioned that, the Sean Layden, Jim Ryan voice track around crossplay was very bad, and became more of a problem because they kept running their mouths about it, where I was like, if you guys would just shut up, nobody would make as big a deal out of this as they're making now. But on top of that, what we find out later is that, while they were trying to kind of deflect and obfuscate what was going on with crossplay and why it wasn't there on PlayStation in the initial years, was because they were trying to put together this deal for revenue payback whenever the metrics showed that they were theoretically losing revenue due to crossplay, because PlayStation primary consumers were off, playing games on other platforms and putting their money there instead of on PlayStation. We're not. I don't think we're even quite in that end of the spectrum, but we are definitely in a space where, the comments are made by Totoki. Helldivers 2 shows up, which I think caught everyone off guard, including myself. And then you have this job posting go up, and with no commentary or voice track around it, even though they talked about this a lot at the recent investors meeting that they do every single year in the May-June timeframe. But I think this is resulting in a lot of the, in addition to console wars, right, this is resulting in a lot of the differences of opinion and speculation, but you also have some PlayStation fans who are kind of like, look, if you lose the glitz, right, if you lose the chrome, the bling, if you lose the reason why I look at your brand as a prestige brand, then I'm no longer going to be interested in investing in you. So my response, and I don't think Donnell's talking to that extreme, but he mentioned some things that are kind of in that vein. And so my response to him, which is really where my assessment is on this job posting, right? Today, as of right now, I do not believe that the big games, the marquee titles, marquee IP from the S-tier studios, which I count as Guerrilla, Insomniac, Naughty Dog, Polyphony, Sony Santa Monica, and Sucker Punch, will go to other platforms other than PC on the 15 to 24 months delay. So again, what I'm saying here is that I don't expect those games to go to Xbox. Let's just constrain it to that, since that's really what the argument is about. I don't expect those games to go to Xbox. If they do go to Xbox, I assume that they will be on the same 15 to 24 month delay as PC. And I think part of this is that if the next Xbox is not a traditional console and is a hybrid Xbox PC, those games are going to be on that thing anyway. When you look at the jobs that are subordinate to this senior director for managing, platform partnerships or whatever, the billets, the recs that are underneath that are called, whatever their subordinate function is, but they're combinatorial of Xbox and PC. I think that's because when we get to the next generation, there is going to be no difference from a storefront perspective and an access point perspective between an Xbox and a PC. I think PlayStation would maybe know this. Although they're competitors, I think there has to be discussions going on between the two, because there's a symbiotic relationship of whose software is available on where. And, if Xbox is making maneuvers, right, to position itself, it's got to be having conversations with people. So I think PlayStation has enough indications and warnings to believe that the next Xbox is going to be a PC, and so those games are going to be available on it if they put them on PC in the same 15 to 24 month delay, and therefore a job rec that combines the names of the Xbox and the PC platform within one function makes sense, because functionally they are the same type of device. So I mentioned here, I could see collections, anthologies of older games from those houses going as an outside chance, meaning, okay, even if you don't... So again, my first stance is I don't think they're going at all. Tier 2 is, if they do go, they'll be on the 15 to 24 month delay, just because the next Xbox is actually a PC and it's going to get those games anyway. There's no difference between what they're doing now and this. What I could see as a ramp up or an acceleration or an escalation of what they're doing, for Xbox, would be if they sent collections over there from those studios, meaning the next Uncharted, let's just say, wouldn't be going to Xbox, in air quotes, day and date for, as it goes to PlayStation. But what I could see is I could absolutely see them doing the the Uncharted 4 collection, right? The thing that had Uncharted 4 plus, I can't now remember the name of the deal of the expandable that went along with it. But I could also see them doing like an Uncharted 1, 2, 3, and 4 collection, right? And sending that over to Xbox. But those are my positions until I'm told anything otherwise. Like, I'm not taking a job posting and losing my mind over what it may mean. And so I continue to write, and then I can see it being up to consumers if they are willing to wait, meaning if consumers want to play PlayStation games, and those PlayStation games are coming to an Xbox PC hybrid, I presume that some consumers will make a decision, however crazy of a, however low probability that means. I see the possibility that some individual consumers will decide that they're going to buy an Xbox PC hybrid and play those games on PC, particularly if you are sending like all the things over there on the 15 to 24 month delay and additional collections. I will say part of my perspective on this too is if there is an Xbox that is a traditional console next generation, it may also get the same games that are going to PC as an Xbox release, right? That may be the escalation from what they're doing now. I've always said I wouldn't mind waiting on a PlayStation game coming to PC, although I don't really wait. But I've always said, if there ever came a day where it didn't make sense for me to buy a PlayStation, I wouldn't have a problem waiting for Spider-Man 2 to show up on PC 15 months later, because I'm getting a better version of the game. I'm getting something that plays at higher frame rates. I'm getting something that plays at higher resolutions. I'm getting something that plays more performant. I'm getting something that supports 3440 by 1440p resolution for when I play on my ultra widescreen monitors, etc. And sometimes I get it with more content. So this is all a way for me to say I differ with a lot of pundits and journalists, but I also definitely differ with the Xbox console warriors who need to get a dig in on PlayStation players and are running around saying this means everything is coming. I've said there is a difference, however those people, those conversational circles choose not to acknowledge it because they're more concerned about console wars than actual objective assessment. There is a difference between the slide that talks about the structure of PlayStation games going to other platforms from the investor call, and from the meeting interview with the Sony corporate CFO. Right, there is a difference between saying, "Hey, look, there are 3 buckets of IP. There's the marquee IP S tier stuff, which is going to PC on a 15 to 24 month delay, but it goes to PlayStation first because that's the product differentiator that we hold sacred, that encourages people to buy our platform. Then there's this bucket of other stuff, which is basically IP that we don't really care about, that we don't have any intentions of doing anything with. And if a Bandai Namco comes to us and says, hey, we'd really like to take that IP, like Patapon, and publish it on another platform, we're going to say, yay, verily, okay, because we don't think that's a thing that drives people to buy a PlayStation. And then there's this third bucket of stuff, which is the multiplayer stuff, which has a high dependency on total number of concurrent players, particularly in the launch window. And that stuff is subject to going to multiple platforms at launch. There's a difference between that and when Phil Spencer says, hey, there's no red line. There's also a huge difference from a corporate perspective in the dynamics that we see when, again, I'm just going to go ahead and speculate based on the things that I've seen and the way I've seen things unfold. There's also a huge difference between PlayStation leadership being in sync on that being the strategy and what has gone on at Xbox, where I feel like that strategy is something that was forced on the Xbox division, and they were, after years of digging their heels in about it and being resistant to it, basically told they were going to have to do it, or at least given a number that they needed to hit to a point that was their option, right, to hit that metric and that number, because they were told, you're no longer going to be given an accountability margin or a pass for not delivering on these numbers after the $70 billion acquisition. So, regardless of how we try and say, well, PlayStation publishes this, so if they publish one title, then that makes them like a third-party publisher. That means they're doing the same thing as Xbox. Again, it is absolutely not, because we have documented traceability and evidence and objective statements from leadership on both corporations that detail how the way they're going about doing things is different. And so choosing to ignore those differences, I feel like just drains the nuance and the granularity out of the gaming conversation that we should be having, which is a gaming conversation focused on details and granularity and decomposition of what is happening and why it's happening, and how market dynamics, while they might impact multiple publishers, differ because of the scale that you're at, differ because of the install base that you have, differ because of the market share that you have, but also, most importantly, probably differ because the core competencies and the market adjacencies you have. When you look at Xbox sitting within Microsoft, and you look at a company that has market strengths and adjacencies in cloud, in software integration, in owning DirectX, right, the layer that the vast majority of people build their games on top of. That is starkly different than the dynamics that you're going to have at PlayStation, where if PlayStation wants to put a game in the cloud or stand up something on cloud infrastructure, they're paying for that, right? They're going to Amazon, they're going to AWS, and that is coming out of their capital investment. That is not a pass-through cost like it is in Xbox. And so again, the reasons and the causalities for these things being different, these things are objective and tangible and quantifiable. And I don't think you can just kind of hand wave and say, well, they're the same thing. They're absolutely not. So at any rate, I think that's all I'm going to do to cover that topic. I suspect that topic will be swirling around and will be quite, have a lot of energy behind it and be quite toxic on most outlets and most channels elsewhere. But I did want to kind of cover it here. So I didn't completely bypass it. It's not normally a type of thing that I would like to cover because it just happened like 24 hours ago. And I think there's a very long tail in the tape that hasn't been told yet. But first initial comments out the door, and we'll just kind of see how it develops and how it goes. So thanks so much for anybody who happened to swing by and listen to this live streamed episode. For anybody who happens to swing by and watch the archive version of this as a video on demand on the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, I appreciate you. I also appreciate you if you were here live. Please feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can just receive a notification whenever I post new content. Now, what is going to happen and go on with the logic files? I don't know. This is kind of an experiment. I've taken the formula and the structure of the way I kind of did things when I was trying to do talking about games, which I think I got some positive response to. But I'm trying to take that formula and tweak it just a tad into this thing that I now call the logic files. My plan, please don't hold me to it. My plan right now is I'm going to try to do these every Tuesday and every Friday night. So I'm actually doing it late because I got behind on some house stuff and preparing for another podcast that I needed to do. But the intention is to do these maybe in kind of smaller formats on Tuesday and Friday nights. And I think the big difference is talking about games and really on E2KG, which is the other podcast that I do in conjunction with some co-hosts. I was really trying to focus on news and tangible news and not cover like social media issues and cultural interaction. But I think there are some relevant topics that are happening out there in terms of kind of how we interpret and how we talk about and how we interact on different gaming topics and the overall understanding that we take away from them. And I have decided, after talking to some people, I think it's important that I put out a perspective on those topics as well, just so people have an additional perspective in the space that, in my opinion, is not driven by a need to have PlayStation win in an argument or Xbox win in an argument. So that would probably be the primary facet in how this content is different from others. But like I said, I'm going to try and hit marks to get one of these out on both Tuesdays and Fridays. So times are TBD. That's a little wonky, but I have to figure that out. But I'm probably going to be targeting the 9:30 p.m. time frame Eastern. So please feel free to keep an eye out for that on both the main YouTube page for the channel and also my Twitter account. Until next time, take care of yourself, stay safe out there, play the games that you like. Come here to talk to me about the games that you love. Once again, my name has been Game Logic from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, one of the co-hosts of the Enough to Keep Going Weekly Games podcast on the E2KG Network podcasting channel. Until next time, good night, good luck, and good gaming. That's going to do it for me. I'm out of here.